There's a truth not many people dare to admit. Women are not just drawn to looks, wealth, or sweet words. What stirs them the deepest often comes from something they can't even name. It's not the bad boy, it's not the rich guy, and it's definitely not the nice guy. It's a kind of energy, quiet, profound, and effortless, a presence that makes them curious, cautious, and yet unable to look away. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And just like that, there are men who walk into a room, say nothing, do not try to impress, but still make every head turn, not because they boast, but because they are still enough for others to want to stay near. They live as if they don't need approval. They don't chase, and that, paradoxically, is exactly what makes them irreplaceable. In this video or article, we're going to explore 6 types of men that 99% of women can't resist. Not because of tricks, but because of the inner presence they have cultivated. So if you've ever asked yourself, what are women really attracted to? The answer, perhaps, lies not at the surface, but in a depth you've never truly considered. Are you ready? 1. The man who doesn't blink. He doesn't need agreement. There's a type of man who women cannot quite explain their feelings for. It's not because he's wealthy, not because he's a bad boy, and definitely not the obedient, nice guy type who tries too hard to please. He is the man who doesn't blink, the man who doesn't need agreement to feel valuable. In analytical psychology, Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The greatest privilege in life is to live in alignment with your true self. And this man is the embodiment of that. He doesn't seek validation, he doesn't live to please, and that alone awakens something primal in a woman's subconscious. Imagine this. You're a woman walking into a room. You know you stand out. You're used to people shifting their tone and posture just because you're present. But today, there's a man who's unaffected. He looks at you as a person, not as a trophy. He doesn't flash a polite smile, doesn't text you obsessively, doesn't play along just to stay in your world. He doesn't blink, he doesn't flinch, doesn't chase. There's simply a stillness, quiet and steady enough to make you ask, what is he thinking? Women are not drawn to perfection, they're drawn to certainty, to self-possession. They're sensitive to grounded energy more than looks, money, or charm. The man who doesn't blink, metaphorically, is someone who doesn't outsource his emotional destiny, not because he's arrogant, but because he has arrived at what Jung calls individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself. Separate from the projections and expectations of the world. He doesn't need your approval. He doesn't need you to fall for him. He doesn't need your praise. But he doesn't belittle you either. Everything about him simply is. No pretense, no need for performance, and that's what makes him rare. You won't see this man get anxious when you reply late to a message. You won't see him scramble to keep you with poetic texts or over-explanations. If you want to leave, he won't stop you, not because he's indifferent, but because he doesn't live in fear of loss. And to a woman, especially one used to being chased, pampered, and pleaded with, the natural response is, she starts to chase him. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When a woman meets a man like this, what she feels is not instant love, it's unconscious gravity. She doesn't know why, but she's drawn in, because in her unconscious mind, a man like that symbolizes safety, worth, and something she's never truly possessed before. A man who doesn't need her, but still chooses to stay if he wants to. The man who doesn't blink knows how to say no without apologizing, knows how to walk away without leaving behind a dramatic scene, knows how to be silent and still be felt. He is the man who has faced his shadow, exactly as Jung describes. He no longer fears rejection. He no longer wears the good guy mask that whispers, "Please choose me." He chooses himself first, and that, paradoxically, makes others choose him. True attraction doesn't come from what you say. It comes from how you don't need to say anything to be noticed. The man who doesn't blink doesn't win by fighting for love. He wins by refusing to negotiate with his core values. He doesn't need to try hard to be magnetic. He simply stays still, and everything else comes to him. If you're asking, how'd I become this man? The answer isn't in tricks or flirting techniques. It's in this. Have you made peace with yourself? Can you live without agreement and still stand firm? Can you say no to what's wrong, even when it comes from someone you deeply desire. Because in the end, what makes a man truly attractive is not his looks, his bank account, or his words. It's the fact that he has become fully himself, fearlessly and unapologetically. 2. The mirror man. No performance needed. There's a kind of man who doesn't speak much, doesn't boast, and never tries to perform, yet he still makes women pause, notice, and linger longer than they expected. He's not the center of the event, but when you talk to him, you feel seen clearly, without judgment. He is a mirror, not the kind that distorts you into feeling worse, not the kind that flatters you falsely, just a mirror that reflects you as you are. Carl Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." And that's precisely what sets this man apart. He's not trying to win you. He's not proving his worth with things outside of himself. He's come to know himself so deeply that he no longer needs to perform anything. In a world where men are taught to impress, show off, and create attraction, this man chooses to remain silent, to listen. He doesn't interrupt your story with, "I've been through that too," or "That's nothing, let me tell you about mine." When you speak about your fears at work, he doesn't immediately offer solutions or make you feel foolish for caring too much. Instead, he simply asks, "How does that make you feel?" A simple question, yet filled with the weight of real presence. Women live in a society that demands they be more beautiful, more successful, less emotional, while still expecting them to be gentle, empathetic, and lovely. So when a man doesn't try to do anything, and simply shows up, it becomes radically different. The mirror man doesn't redirect the conversation toward himself. He holds space. He doesn't need to become something. He is just a man who listens, with a clear mind and a heart free from judgment. And the more he doesn't try to be loved, the more magnetic he becomes. Because in a woman's eyes, true safety doesn't come from pretty words. It comes from feeling understood without having to over-explain. Jung called this projection. We don't usually fall in love with the real person. We fall for the part of ourselves that we've lost, but recognize in them. And the mirror man triggers unconscious projection in women, their unmet softness, dreams, desires, not because he's trying to be the ideal man, but because he's empty enough to reflect truthfully. Truthfully, this man is often quiet. He doesn't make noise, but you feel his presence in every gesture. When he doesn't rush to reply but takes a breath before responding. When his eyes don't dart around, but rest calmly, focused. When he doesn't persuade you to stay, he lets you walk toward him, if you choose to, because he doesn't need to control the game. And ironically, women feel safer around a man who doesn't try to dominate them. Emotional stability, calm energy, and the ability to hold space. These are the strongest unspoken languages a man can ever speak. A woman once shared her impression of a man at a crowded seminar. He didn't say a word, but every time she spoke, his eyes followed her, respectfully, attentively. Later, he said just one thing, "I can feel that." No compliment, no argument, just a simple mirror, and she never forgot it. The mirror man doesn't dazzle you like a spark. He doesn't make you fall hard. He makes you want to stay longer. Because around him, you don't have to perform. You get to be yourself. If you're a man reading this, ask yourself, are you trying to become a version others expect of you? Or are you clearing your mind and heart enough to reflect others honestly? Remember Jung's words, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But once you do, you no longer need to perform. You just need to be present, and that is enough. 3. The man who carries a storm in his stillness, calm but not fragile. There are men who walk into a room without saying a word and still command attention. Not because of their looks, not because of wealth, but because their presence seems to slow down the space around them. He's not loud, yet he can't be overlooked. He doesn't seek attention, yet people are drawn to him. He is a man who carries a storm within, but wears peace on his face. Still, but not fragile. Silent, but never submissive. Gentle, yet deeply respected. Carl Jung once said, "A man who is not in touch with his inner chaos becomes dangerous, not to others, but to himself." A man who doesn't recognize the storm inside him will eventually be consumed by it. But the man we speak of here, he doesn't deny the storm. He lives with it, tames it, and transforms it into a quiet, unwavering presence. Imagine a man standing alone in the corner of a cafe. He's not trying to draw attention, but his gaze, slow, deep, unblinking, makes you feel seen through. He doesn't avert his eyes. He doesn't dominate, but if you lock eyes with him for even a few seconds, you'll feel one undeniable truth. This man has walked through places I've never even dared to approach. That is the essence of true stillness. It doesn't come from being emotionless, but from feeling everything, and still choosing not to react impulsively. This man is not a cold-hearted figure. He doesn't use silence as manipulation. His quietness has depth. It creates space for others to breathe, and a natural boundary that makes pretenders uneasy. In a society that teaches men to prove themselves with success or to suppress every trace of vulnerability, this man chooses another path. I don't need to prove anything. I know who I am, and it's that self-knowing that creates the most powerful gravity. You'll see he reacts slowly, not because he's indifferent, but because he refuses to be dragged by temporary emotions. When a woman pushes the emotional scale to the edge, instead of panicking or chasing, he stays still, like an anchor in the middle of a storm. That kind of calm doesn't come from theory. It comes from life, from once losing control, from once shouting, breaking, and now choosing silence so as not to be swept away again. To women, this kind of man holds a strange kind of magnetism, not romantic in a dreamy way, not sweet in a predictable way, but in a way that makes her confront herself. When she pushes his limits, he doesn't react. She feels exposed. When she speaks, he listens fully. She feels understood. When she feels lost, he says nothing. And in that silence, she finds herself looking inward. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves we often hide. The man who carries a storm in stillness is the one who's faced a shadow. He doesn't deny the ugly parts. He has looked them in the eye and thus no longer fears them in others. For a woman, this creates a kind of deep safety, not the protection of muscle or money, but emotional safety. He won't run when I reveal the imperfect parts of me. In other words, he may not be the man who makes her heart skip a beat at first glance, but he's the man she returns to, again and again, to understand more, because in a world full of noise, he is silent with meaning. In a world addicted to reaction, he responds with intention, and that kind of strength cannot be faked. It's the strength that comes from having been broken, but instead of building a shell, he stood up with a healed heart. When you meet a man like this, you don't need to ask, what has he been through? Just stay near him for a while, and you'll feel it. This man has conquered himself, and in a woman's eyes, there is nothing more magnetic than that. 4. The man who knows when to walk away, silent, without begging. There is a kind of man who doesn't need to raise his voice to show strength. He doesn't need to threaten, doesn't need to stage drama, and certainly doesn't need to make anyone feel regret. He simply stands up and walks away, calmly, quietly, without explanation, and that departure causes more impact than any complaint ever could. Carl Jung once said, "Maturity begins the moment you learn to let go of what no longer belongs to you." The man who knows when to walk away doesn't quit because he's weak. He walks away because he is awake, because he understands his own limits and the value of peace. In a world where most men are conditioned to try a bit harder, to hold on just a little longer, to prove their masculinity through endurance, this man chooses a different path. I am not a temporary option. If you need time to figure out whether I'm worth it, then you already have your answer. This man doesn't walk away in anger. He doesn't say things like, "You'll regret this. I gave you everything. No one will love you like I did." No, he leaves quietly. No drama, no blaming, no pointing fingers. Just one clear message. I don't stay where clarity is absent. Some may say, that kind of man is too cold. But in truth, this is self-respect in its purest form. It's not pride. It's not performance. It's the result of deep self-awareness, of knowing one's worth, and not needing anyone's approval to believe in it. A woman may test you with indifference, with silence, with ambiguity. She might be waiting to see, can you handle it? And if you keep chasing, keep hoping for reassurance, keep proving your worth, you've unknowingly made yourself into a candidate. But the man who knows when to walk away doesn't play that game. He walks away, not to punish her, but to protect his own dignity. Carl Jung also said, The man who lacks the courage to let go will remain trapped in half-lived relationships he calls effort. Sounds familiar? Countless men are still trying to salvage relationships in which they've already lost themselves. Lost their freedom, lost their peace, lost their presence. The man who walks away isn't lacking emotion. He just doesn't let emotion make decisions on his behalf. He can love, but he doesn't beg. He can feel regret, but he won't return once the line is drawn. He can miss you, but he won't trade his peace for someone who isn't willing. And when he walks away, at the right moment, in the right way, he becomes a living lesson. The woman may not realize it at first, but later, she will remember, there was someone who once chose me and left, only because I didn't choose him back in time. That is not abandonment. That is a wordless message. I don't compete for a place in someone's life. I show up once, clearly, and with enough decency to walk away without hurting either of us if I'm treated as an option. So how do you become this kind of man? It's not an overnight shift. It comes from building within, from cultivating an inner life strong enough to know when to leave. Without needing anyone to validate your decision, you had to go through a few heartbreaks, a few times of over-forgiving, a few seasons of enduring the wrong person to finally understand. Love cannot be begged for. True connection does not require a fight to be kept alive, and you'll learn something precious. Walking away at the right time doesn't make you less of a man. In fact, it makes you unforgettable far more than anyone who stayed too long out of fear. Have you ever walked away at the right time? Or are you still staying because of a vague hope that they might change? Remember this, not all connections are worth preserving, and not all deep love should come at the cost of your self-respect. A man may walk away without needing to win, but he will never allow himself to lose to himself. 5. The man who makes her feel like she's the only one, without saying a word. Have you ever met a man whose gaze alone made you feel chosen? Not because he said sweet things, not because he flirted skillfully or performed some rehearsed charm. It's just that, the moment you walked into the room, his eyes stopped, no blinking, no rush, no pretense, and you felt something deeper than any compliment. He sees me. Carl Jung once said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. This man doesn't make you feel special by convincing you. He creates a reaction, not through words, but through the power of presence. You might call it charisma. You might call it calm confidence. Or maybe it's simply a silence that carries depth. But what you sense is the emotional gravity of a man who doesn't need to say much to express everything. Women live in a world flooded with noise, image, empty promises, and men constantly trying to prove themselves. So when they meet a man who doesn't try to sell himself, doesn't try to score points, doesn't strive to be the perfect man, they pay attention immediately. That man doesn't have to say, I like you, I choose you, you're different, because his silence already says it all. When you're speaking, his eyes don't scan the room for someone more attractive. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't try to impress you with achievements or clever stories. He just listens, fully, patiently, without calculation. And what moves you isn't what he says, but the unmistakable feeling. In this moment, I am the center of his world. This is a rare kind of magnetism, the magnetism of complete presence. Jung called it soul interaction, where no words are needed. And nothing needs explanation. You recognize each other, not through logic, but through a subtle meeting of inner beings. The man who makes you feel like the only one usually doesn't belong to the noisy crowd. He's quiet, but his stillness has weight. When you walk by, you sense his gaze, not hungry, not desperate, but not indifferent either. It's as if he sees something in you that no one else has bothered to notice. You don't have to try to impress him. You don't need to be more beautiful, more clever, more noticeable, because he doesn't choose you for how loudly you shine. He chooses you for simply being there. As you are, this man is unforgettable, not because of something he said, but because he created an emotional experience that few ever replicate. Unspoken respect, unforced choice, unflashy recognition, and paradoxically, it is because he doesn't need you that you begin to want to be chosen by him. True attraction doesn't come from flowery words. It comes from a man who remains grounded in himself, even in your presence. No act, no attempt to impress, no losing sight of his core values just to win your approval. Carl Jung once said, Man is not defined by the mask he wears, but by the essence he forgets. And this man, he wears no mask. He isn't caught in the game of proving he's enough. He is simply himself, and around him, you feel safe enough to be yourself. 2. You might meet many men who tell you you're beautiful, that you're interesting, that you're one of a kind. But in the end, it's the man who never needed to say a word, and yet made you feel all of that. He's the one you'll never forget. 6. The man who turns pain into power, and she can feel it. Have you ever stood next to someone and felt, this man has walked through darkness? Not because he told you, not because he complained, but because there's something about him, the eyes, the stillness, the way he answers everything, that lets you know, this man has known pain, and more importantly, he didn't break. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But there are rare men out there, men who faced their shadow. They didn't run, they didn't blame, they didn't drown it in alcohol, sex, or overwork. They sat with their pain, and they turned it into power. She can feel that, even when he says nothing, because a man who has truly suffered doesn't pretend to be untouchable. He doesn't need to puff up to prove he's strong. He doesn't play the victim to win sympathy. He walks with the calm of someone who's walked through fire. When you ask him about his past, he doesn't dodge, but neither does he dramatize. The way he speaks of failure, loss, betrayal, has no bitterness, no revenge, only clarity. A clarity that says, life isn't easy, but I'm still here, whole enough, strong enough, to love again. This kind of man makes a woman feel safe, in a primal way. Not because he's wealthy, not because he's physically protective, but because she knows, if something happens, he won't run. He's fallen before, he's shattered before, and from those shattered pieces, he learned how to rise, how to hold himself gently, without expecting someone else to fix him. In a world where so many men avoid emotions or let emotions control them, this man knows how to live with his feelings without being swallowed by them. When she gets angry, he doesn't get defensive. When she's hurting, he doesn't rush to fix it. He stays. He becomes a quiet space where she can be fully herself, because he knows people don't need saving, they need understanding. Jung said, no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This man has gone through darkness, and he didn't bring fear back with him. He brought wisdom, and that is what pulls her in. When you fall for a man like this, you don't fall because he's perfect. You fall because he's done performing. He doesn't dress himself up as the good guy or the strong one. He lets you see him completely, scars and all. And in a world full of masks, truth is rarer than seduction. The man who's known pain isn't afraid of a woman's emotions. He doesn't retreat when she cries, doesn't lose his temper when she's upset, doesn't judge when she feels small, because he knows we all have our path. And on his own path, he once needed someone to sit in silence and not walk away. Now, he becomes that presence for the woman he loves. He doesn't use his past to score points, doesn't craft poetic captions, doesn't use pain to play the role of deep man. Because the depth is real, she will always remember that gaze, not just for its gentleness, but for the quiet fire in the eyes of someone who has lost, has hurt, but never gave up on himself. And if you're a man currently walking through pain, don't rush to forget, sit with it, name it, learn from it, because you don't need to be strong in the emotionless way. You just need to be the man who matures through what he's endured. Carl Jung once said, the wound is the place where the light enters you. If you let that light in, it's not just you who will change. Anyone who steps into your world will feel something too. This man isn't perfect, but he is real, and I feel safe here. When you move beyond the stage of chasing surface-level attraction, you'll realize that the most important thing is not about how to make others like you, but how to live truthfully with yourself. Yes, women can be drawn to appearance, status, or charming words, but what makes them stay is the depth of presence in a man who knows who he is. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that holds true in love. If you're not deep enough, real enough, still enough, you'll keep repeating half-hearted relationships. But when you show up with a presence forged in silence, in solitude, and through pain, you won't need to chase anyone. They will find you. Because you're not the kind of man people meet every day. You're the kind of man who makes others want to become better versions of themselves. And if something in these words speaks to you, drop a comment below. I'm becoming that man. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to follow this journey into self-mastery, one that's deeper, quieter, and truly different. And remember, you don't need to chase anyone. Just go deep enough into yourself, and you'll become the man the whole world can't take its eyes off.